I stood there in my burgundy sweater, hands trembling around the glossy, white cake box. It was supposed to be the centerpiece of the night, a $300 masterpiece from the best bakery in Chicago. I imagined it on the table, everyone smiling, maybe even my Uncle Mark complimenting me for once. Instead, the room went silent. He looked at me, grinning like he'd just told the punchline of a joke. "Guess nobody wanted you here anyway," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole dining room to hear. Forks froze midair. My Aunt Linda's smile faltered. I could feel 20 eyes on me, weighing me down like bricks. I swallowed hard, the smell of roasted turkey turning bitter in my nose. In that moment, I wasn't holding a cake. I was holding proof that I didn't belong. Have you ever been humiliated by someone you thought was family? Because that night, my definition of family shattered in one sentence. When I was little, Thanksgiving was magic. Not just because of the food, though the smell of Aunt Linda's pumpkin pie baking in the oven was enough to make even a grumpy teenager smile. It was more than that. It was the ritual, the gathering, the laughter that spilled from the kitchen to the living room, the sound of football games humming in the background, and the way the whole house seemed to glow in the soft light of late November. My family wasn't perfect, far from it, but as a child I didn't see the cracks. I only saw the table piled with mashed potatoes and gravy, cranberry sauce that wobbled like jelly, and my mom's golden brown roast turkey. I saw Uncle Mark, the one who would later make me question everything, as a larger-than-life figure. The funny uncle, the storyteller, the one who would wink at me across the table and pass me an extra dinner roll when my mom wasn't looking. Back then, I believed he liked me. Growing up in Evanston, Illinois, our house was small but warm. I was the oldest of 3 kids, my brother Daniel, who lived for video games, and my little sister Emily, who was practically born with glitter in her hair and a paintbrush in her hand. My parents worked hard, and holidays were their way of reminding us that no matter how busy life got, we'd always come back to each other. Every Thanksgiving, we'd drive 40 minutes to Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark's place. Their house was bigger, newer, with polished hardwood floors and a kitchen that seemed to breathe out the scent of cinnamon and sage. As soon as we arrived, I'd be swept into a hug by Aunt Linda, her perfume a mix of vanilla and something floral I could never quite name. She'd always tell me I was growing like a weed, even when I was fully grown. The dining table was long and draped in a cream tablecloth with gold embroidery. Each place setting had matching plates, folded napkins, and those little name cards that made everyone feel special. I remember how proud I felt the year my name card had a tiny hand-drawn cake on it because Aunt Linda knew I loved baking. I must have been 13 then, and I stayed in the kitchen with her that year, helping to whisk gravy and sneak spoonfuls of whipped cream for the pies. That's when I fell in love with baking, the way it brought people together, the way it felt like giving a piece of yourself to someone. By the time I was 28, I wasn't that shy teenager anymore. I'd moved into a small apartment downtown, worked as a marketing assistant, and ran a side hustle baking custom cakes for clients. I wasn't rich, but I worked hard for what I had. Every year, I still made the trip to Aunt Linda's for Thanksgiving. But something had changed in the last few years. The laughter felt a little tighter. The conversations were peppered with subtle jabs about city life, or spending too much on fancy things. My cousins, Rachel and Tyler, seemed to find new ways to remind me that I was still single. And Uncle Mark? His jokes had an edge now. Where once he'd winked at me, now he'd raise his eyebrows and say things like, "Oh, the career girl is here. Too busy to settle down, huh?" It wasn't enough to stop me from coming, but it was enough to make me dread certain moments. Still, this year was supposed to be different. I decided to do something special. Instead of bringing store-bought pie or a bottle of wine, I was going to bring a cake. Not just any cake, but the most beautiful one I'd ever made. 3 tiers, rich chocolate sponge with hazelnut praline filling, wrapped in smooth fondant with hand-painted autumn leaves cascading down the side. I'd ordered some of the decorations from a specialty shop in New York, and the whole thing had cost me close to $300 in ingredients and finishing touches. It wasn't about showing off. It was about giving something I loved to the people I called family. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, I could hardly wait to see their faces. I imagined Aunt Linda gasping, cousins taking pictures, even Uncle Mark cracking a rare, genuine smile. I even bought a deep red sweater dress to match the warm tones of the cake. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke early, my apartment filled with the scent of chocolate and caramel. I worked carefully, layer by layer, smoothing every edge, checking every detail twice. By noon, the cake was perfect. I packed it in a white box with gold trim, secured with ribbon, and placed it gently in the back seat of my car. The drive to Aunt Linda's was like stepping back in time. The trees were bare, their branches clawing at the gray sky. I passed neighborhoods where kids were tossing footballs in their yards, kitchens lit up with the silhouettes of families bustling around. My heart felt full. This was going to be a good day. When I arrived, I could hear laughter from inside before I even rang the bell. Aunt Linda opened the door, her face warm and welcoming. "Oh, sweetheart. You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug. She glanced at the cake box and let out a little gasp. "What is this?" "A surprise," I said, smiling. I walked into the dining room, where everyone was gathered. Rachel was scrolling on her phone, Tyler was pouring himself a drink, and Uncle Mark was holding court at the head of the table, telling some story that had everyone laughing. I set the cake down on the side table, untied the ribbon, and opened the lid. Gasps. Murmurs. Even Rachel looked up from her phone. This is amazing," Aunt Linda said softly. I caught Uncle Mark's eyes across the room. He smirked, not the warm smirk I remembered from childhood, but something colder. I didn't think much of it at the time. If I had, maybe I would have braced myself for what was coming. From the moment I set the cake on the side table, I could feel something off. It was like I'd walked into a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, except no one had actually stopped talking, they'd just changed the tone. Tyler glanced at the cake, then at me. "Wow," he said, drawing out the word in that sarcastic way only cousins can. "Guess some people really need to make an entrance." Rachel snorted into her glass of sparkling water. I forced a smile. "It's just a cake, Ty. Thought I'd bring something special this year." He raised his eyebrows, eyes darting toward Uncle Mark like they were sharing some private joke. I busied myself arranging the plates, pretending I didn't notice. The kitchen was buzzing, Aunt Linda pulling rolls out of the oven, my mom checking the gravy, Emily chopping herbs at the counter. But even here, I couldn't escape the subtle digs. "You still living in that tiny apartment downtown?" Rachel asked, leaning against the counter. "Must be cozy." "It's enough for me," I said, keeping my tone light. "Besides, it's close to work." She smiled sweetly. "Right. Because you're always working." Emily shot me a look, a little warning glance, like she knew where this was heading. It had been like this for the past few Thanksgivings. The jokes about my city life, the casual reminders that I was still single, still without kids, still somehow incomplete in their eyes. I used to brush it off, telling myself they didn't mean any harm. But this year, with the cake sitting just a few feet away, I felt the weight of every comment. Uncle Mark was in rare form that afternoon. He was holding court in the living room, telling a story about some business trip he'd taken back in the 90s, everyone hanging on his words like they were pearls of wisdom. When I stepped in to grab my phone from the couch, he looked up. The entrepreneur is here," he said with a smirk. "Still baking for a living? Or have you moved on to bigger things?" The way he said bigger things made it sound like baking was a hobby for children. I swallowed my irritation. "Business is good," I replied. "Good," he said, leaning back. "Just don't forget, hobbies don't pay the bills forever." A few people laughed. My chest tightened. As the afternoon wore on, the tension didn't so much spike as simmer. Every time I tried to join a conversation, it seemed to splinter without me. Every time I shared something about my life, someone redirected it. At one point, I was telling Aunt Linda about a charity event I'd baked for, a fundraiser for a children's hospital. She seemed genuinely interested, but before I could finish, Tyler chimed in. "Speaking of kids, did you know Rachel's little girl just got into the gifted program? She's only 6. The room lit up with congratulations. My story about the fundraiser was left hanging in the air, unclaimed. Dinner prep was a delicate dance, people weaving around each other in the kitchen, balancing trays, stirring pots. I offered to help, but my mom waved me off. "You've done enough, honey. Just relax." It should have felt like kindness. Instead, it felt like dismissal. I ended up standing by the window, watching the neighbor's golden retriever chase leaves across the yard. The smell of turkey and rosemary filled the air, but it didn't comfort me the way it used to. When it was finally time to sit down, I noticed my place card had been moved. Instead of sitting near Aunt Linda or my parents, I was tucked at the far end of the table between Rachel and Tyler. Across from me was the empty seat for Uncle Mark, the head of the table on this end. Rachel eyed the cake as we Saturday, so $300 for a cake. That's something. I blinked. Huh? How do you know what it cost? She grinned. Aunt Linda mentioned you told her. I shook my head. I didn't tell her the price.
Oh.
She popped a grape tomato into her mouth. Well, must have been a lucky guess. Halfway through dinner, as dishes were being passed and the conversation roamed from sports to politics to family gossip, Uncle Mark leaned forward. "You know," he said, voice just loud enough to cut through the chatter, "when I was your age, I was already supporting a wife and 2 kids. And a mortgage." The table quieted a bit. I took a sip of water. "Times are different now." "Sure," he said, shrugging. "Or maybe priorities are." Tyler smirked. Rachel covered her mouth like she was hiding a laugh. It was like that all night, little Barb's dressed as conversation. And I kept telling myself, don't make a scene. Not today. After all, Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, about family. I didn't want to be the one to ruin it. But deep down, I knew something was building. By the time dessert was about to be served, the cake had become both my pride and my curse. Everyone had seen it, admired it, even taken pictures. But the more attention it got, the more I noticed Uncle Mark's eyes on me, that smirk like he was just waiting for his moment. And I had no idea that moment was seconds away. Dessert time at Aunt Linda's was usually the happiest part of the evening. The air smelled of coffee brewing in the kitchen, the turkey leftovers were being wrapped up, and the dining table, now cleared of most dishes, became a stage for pies, cookies, and cakes. This year, my cake was the star. Aunt Linda carried it from the side table to the center, like it was made of glass. Conversations hushed as she set it down. The fondant shimmered under the warm lights, the painted leaves catching the gold glow. Someone actually whistled. "Oh my God," Emily whispered beside me. "It's gorgeous." I smiled. For the first time that day, I felt that flicker of why I'd brought it in the first place. Aunt Linda took a knife from the drawer and handed it to me. "You should do the honors," she said. I stepped forward, hands trembling just slightly, the knife catching the light. I was about to make the first slice when Uncle Mark's voice cut through the room. "Hold on," he said, leaning back in his chair. Everyone turned to look at him. He had that smirk, the one I'd been noticing all night, plastered across his face. "You know, before we all dig in," he continued, "I just want to say," he paused, scanning the room like a comedian timing his punchline. "Nobody wanted you here anyway." The words hit like a gunshot. My grip on the knife faltered. There was a silence, so heavy it felt like the walls absorbed it. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. I could see my reflection in the knife's blade, eyes wide, lips parted. Someone coughed. Rachel's mouth curved, just barely. Tyler looked down at his plate, fighting a grin. I tried to process it. Maybe I'd misheard? Maybe it was some twisted attempt at humor? But the look in his eyes told me exactly what it was. Intentional. The cake, my gift, my offering, sat between us like a mocking witness. My mom's voice broke the silence. "Mark," she said softly, a warning in her tone. He held up his hands.
What?
"I'm just saying what we were all thinking." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The room was blurry at the edges, my heartbeat a pounding drum in my ears. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed. Instead, I stepped back, setting the knife down with a soft clink against the plate. In that moment, 100 memories flashed through my mind. Being 13, helping Aunt Linda whip cream while Uncle Mark told me I had real talent. Driving 40 minutes in the snow just to make it to dinner on time. Saving up for this cake, working late nights to pay for it. And here I was reduced to a punchline. The smell of the coffee now made me nauseous. I could hear the sound of a fork scraping a plate somewhere, sharp, metallic. Someone cleared their throat again, the sound exaggerated in the silence. My dad looked at me from across the table, his brows furrowed. Emily reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it once. Aunt Linda, bless her, tried to salvage it. "All right, let's just cut the cake," she said, her voice too bright, like she could stitch the moment back together, if she just smiled hard enough. But the damage was done. I picked up the knife again, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. The fondant gave way with a clean slice, the rich chocolate layers revealed inside. I served the first piece to Aunt Linda, then my mom, then my dad. When I placed a slice in front of Uncle Mark, our eyes met. His smirk hadn't faded. "Looks expensive," he said. I placed the plate down harder than I meant to. "It's not for you," I said quietly. He chuckled like it was all a game. People ate. They complimented the cake, the flavor, the texture, the artistry. And yet it's amazing felt hollow, like they were tasting guilt more than chocolate. I barely touched my own slice. The fork just sat there, the cake slowly losing its perfect shape as the fondant softened. When dessert was over, I slipped into the kitchen, rinsing my plate just to have something to do with my hands. My mom followed me in, her face pale. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," I said simply. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. We both knew there was no way to erase what had just happened. From the living room, I could hear Uncle Mark laughing again, telling some story. His voice was the same, confident, loud, but now it was like nails on glass. I realized then that it wasn't just the cake, or the comment, or the smirk. It was years of these moments, all piling up until one finally broke me. And this was the breaking point. The room was still buzzing with that awful, nervous energy, the kind where everyone pretends nothing happened, but every breath feels heavy with a thing no one's saying. I sat at the edge of my chair, my hands clasped in my lap, staring at the glossy frosting of the cake sitting untouched in the corner. I'd been silent for most of the evening, smiling politely when someone asked me a question, keeping my voice soft so I wouldn't disrupt the fragile peace. But inside, I was boiling. Every little slight, every whispered comment I'd overheard from relatives over the years, every smirk from Uncle Mark, it was all playing in my mind like a cruel highlight reel. I remembered being 15, bringing homemade cookies to Christmas dinner, only for him to joke that store-bought would have been better. I remembered when I graduated college and he told me, "That's cute, but let's see if you can get a real job." Every time, I'd swallowed it down, told myself it wasn't worth making a scene. But tonight, something in me snapped. The moment came when Mark, halfway through his second glass of whiskey, laughed across the table at one of my cousin's jokes. He caught my eye and smirked. That same smirk from earlier, the one that said, "I can say whatever I want to you, and you'll just take it." I set my fork down. The clink was louder than I expected, and a couple of people turned to look. I didn't care. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my ears. "Mark," I said, my voice steady but sharp. The room quieted, like someone had just muted a television. His eyebrows lifted, as if surprised I'd even dared to speak his name with that tone. "You know," I continued, "I've been coming to these dinners for years, and I've lost count of how many little digs you've taken at me. The jokes about my cooking, the comments about my job, the way you roll your eyes when I talk about something I'm proud of. And I've let it slide, because I thought, maybe that's just your way. Maybe I should just keep the peace." He chuckled, a short, mocking sound. "It is my way, sweetheart. We joke in this family. Don't take it so seriously." I leaned forward, my voice low but crystal clear. "It's not joking when it's only aimed at one person, Mark. It's not joking when it's meant to humiliate. That's not family, that's bullying." Across the table, Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably. My cousin Eric's eyes darted between us like he was watching a tennis match. Mark tried to wave me off. "Oh, come on. You're too sensitive. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, making several people flinch. No, I said, my voice rising. I'm just done. Done letting you treat me like I'm less than everyone else here. Done laughing it off so you can feel big in front of your little audience.
He scoffed.
Audience? You think anyone cares that much about? Yes, I cut in, they do care. They've been sitting here for years watching you tear me down. And you know what? Shame on you all for letting it happen. That last line hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. Aunt Linda looked down at her plate. Eric swallowed hard. Even Grandma, who usually jumped in to calm arguments, stayed silent, her eyes on me unreadable. I walked to the dessert table and lifted the cake box. The room's tension tightened, like everyone was wondering if I'd throw it at him. I didn't. Instead, I carried it to the head of the table, right in front of him. This cake, I said, cost me $300. Not because I wanted to show off, but because I wanted to bring something special. Something beautiful. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd see me as part of this family if I gave enough, tried hard enough. I opened the box, revealing the perfect swirls of frosting, the delicate sugar flowers. It was a work of art, and for a moment, even Mark's smirk faltered. But you don't see me, Mark, I continued, my voice breaking just slightly. You've never tried. And I've realized, I don't need your approval to belong. Not here, not anywhere. I took the cake knife from the table and sliced a generous piece. Instead of serving him, I placed it in front of Aunt Linda, who had been watching me with wide eyes. This, I said, is for the people who actually want me here. A slow ripple of movement went through the table. My cousin Eric cleared his throat and asked for a slice. Then, my younger cousin Maddie. One by one, plates were extended, everyone except Mark. He sat there, glaring, but not saying a word. For the first time in years, I felt taller, lighter. My hands didn't shake anymore. When every plate was served, I turned to him. You can keep your seat at the head of the table, Mark. I don't need it. Because tonight, I took back my voice. The room erupted into small conversations again, forks scraping on plates. But the energy had shifted. People met my eyes, smiled at me. Real smiles, not the pitying kind. And Mark? He didn't say another word to me all night. The silence after my words hung in the air like the pause between lightning and thunder. Everyone at the table froze. Tom's smirk faltered first. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, he sat back, eyes narrowing, the way a cornered animal recalculates its next move. Sarah was the first to break the tension, laughing nervously. Oh, come on, Emily. You're being dramatic. This is just a family matter. No need to. No, Sarah. I cut her off, my voice steady, but shaking at the edges. This isn't a family matter anymore. It's a matter of principle. And legal boundaries. And the fact that people I trusted decided they had the right to make decisions about my life behind my back. Across the table, Aunt Linda looked down at her plate like it might swallow her whole. Uncle Steve shifted uncomfortably, the fork in his hand clinking against the china. I didn't raise my voice, but I made sure every word was sharp enough to cut. You've been treating me like the girl you used to babysit, Sarah. The one who couldn't speak up, who thought keeping the peace was more important than her own voice. But I'm not that girl anymore. A storm brewed inside me, years of overlooked slights, dismissive comments, and whispered conversations finally boiling over. The words were flowing faster now, unstoppable. You thought I'd stay quiet because that's easier for everyone. But you forgot that the easiest thing for you isn't always the right thing for me. Tom finally found his voice, leaning forward, his tone low and cold. You think you're going to come in here and throw accusations around? You're going to regret this. Something in me snapped, not in fear, but in defiance.
No, Tom.
The only regret I'll have is if I walk out of here tonight pretending I didn't see what you all tried to do. The room fractured after that. People started talking over each other, Tom insisting I was overreacting, Sarah trying to soothe, Aunt Linda quietly murmuring something about not making a scene. But I didn't let them control the narrative this time. I pushed my chair back and stood, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor like a warning siren. This scene? You all made it. I'm just refusing to sweep it under the rug. Tom's face turned red. You think you're clever, Emily? You think you can come here and ruin... Ruin what? I interrupted. The little plan you had to sign me out of Grandma's will before she even... Sarah's sharp intake of breath cut me off, but it was too late. The truth was out in the open now. Aunt Linda's head snapped up, her eyes darting between Tom and Sarah. I felt my pulse in my ears, but I didn't care.
Yeah, I know about it.
And I've got the paperwork to prove it. That landed like a grenade. The table went silent again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was the weight of inevitability. They all knew I had just shifted the balance of power in the room. When I finally walked out into the cold night air, my legs felt unsteady. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep ache in my chest. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the enormity of what I'd just done. Speaking up felt like both a victory and a loss. I'd stood my ground, yes. I'd refused to be manipulated. But the cost was clear. Whatever fragile ties I had with this side of the family were now fractured, maybe permanently. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. A strange quietness settled over me, like the stillness after a hurricane. My phone buzzed in my purse. 3 messages already. One from Sarah, one from Aunt Linda, one from an unknown number that I guessed was Tom using someone else's phone. I didn't open them. Not yet. Instead, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. Over the next few days, the fallout spread quickly. Word got around the family faster than wildfire. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly checking in via text, clearly fishing for details. One even called me late at night, whispering like she was passing state secrets. I heard you confronted Tom and Sarah in front of everyone. Is it true you have documents? I didn't answer directly. Let's just say I'm done letting other people decide my life for me. At work, I caught myself zoning out during meetings, my mind replaying that night over and over. Sometimes I felt proud. Other times I felt raw and exposed, like I'd peeled away a layer of skin and left it for the world to see. I started journaling again, pages and pages every night, trying to process the tangled knot of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief, and something else I hadn't felt in years, self-respect. 3 days after the confrontation, Aunt Linda called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Emily, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know everything that was going on. I should have asked questions instead of just going along. Her apology didn't erase the hurt, but it cracked the wall I'd built around myself. We talked for almost an hour, not just about that night, but about my childhood, about Grandma, about how easy it is to get swept up in someone else's agenda without realizing it. That call didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that not everyone was my enemy in this. By the end of the week, I knew there was no going back to the way things were. The family dynamic had shifted permanently. Tom and Sarah were keeping their distance, which suited me just fine. And me? I felt different. Heavier in some ways, lighter in others. The price of speaking up is real, I realized. It costs you comfort. It costs you the illusion of harmony. But it buys you something much more valuable. The right to live without swallowing your own truth. That night, as I stood in my kitchen pouring tea, I thought about Grandma. About the quiet strength she'd carried through her life. About how she'd never once told me to keep the peace at the expense of my dignity. I realized I hadn't just defended myself that night. I'd honored her too. The first morning after everything exploded felt quiet. Not the tense, suffocating quiet I'd grown used to in that house, but the kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket. I woke up in my small apartment with sunlight spilling through the blinds, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself for an attack. No sharp words. No fake smiles hiding venom. Just me, breathing in peace. I made coffee slowly, savoring the smell. The mug felt warm in my hands, and I let myself stand there for a moment, staring out at the street below. It wasn't the view from the big family home. It didn't have the expensive drapes or manicured lawns. But it was mine. Every corner of this little place belonged to me, paid for, chosen, and arranged without anyone else's control. That was my first victory. I started journaling every morning. At first, the words were bitter, angry, even shaky. But with each page, they softened. I began writing less about them and more about me, what I wanted, what I loved, what I hadn't allowed myself to dream about because I'd been so consumed with surviving their cruelty. And slowly, the bitterness drained out. The biggest shift came when I decided to go back to school. Not to prove anything to them, not to get applause, but because I wanted to. I enrolled in a part-time business course at the community college nearby. Sitting in that first lecture, notebook open, pen ready, I felt a little spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. Rebuilding wasn't just about repairing what they'd tried to destroy. It was about creating something entirely new. I also started meeting people who didn't know anything about my past. No baggage, no whispered gossip. Just fresh connections built on the present, not on a version of me they thought they knew. There was a woman named Claire from my class who invited me to study with her at a little cafe downtown. She didn't ask about my family drama or pry into my history. She just laughed with me, shared her notes, and told me about her 2 cats who liked to sit on her laptop when she worked. Those moments reminded me that kindness didn't have to be earned through suffering. It could be freely given. One of the most healing things I did was create a vision board. I filled it with images of places I wanted to travel, books I wanted to write, and cozy homes that felt nothing like the cold mansion I'd left behind. It was my reminder that life could be warm, soft, and entirely mine. Some nights, I still lay in bed and thought about the confrontation, the look on their faces when I finally stood up for myself. But now, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a scar I could be proud of. A mark that said I survived and I walked away. And the more I lived in my own truth, the less I cared about what they were doing or saying. Their opinions had no weight here, in my little apartment filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of my own laughter. I wasn't just healing, I was growing. And I promised myself I would never shrink again to fit into someone else's small idea of who I should be. If you've stayed with me until now, I want to thank you, not just for listening to my story, but for allowing me to be vulnerable with you. Sharing something like this isn't easy. When we talk about betrayal, loss, or injustice, it's not just about the events, it's about the pieces of ourselves we feel were taken in the process. I know there might be someone watching who is right in the middle of their own storm. Maybe you've been made to feel small. Maybe you've been excluded, lied to, or treated as though your voice didn't matter. And maybe, like I once did, you're wondering if it's even worth fighting back. I want you to know something, it is worth it. Not because you'll win every battle, not because you'll get an apology, but because every time you choose to stand up for yourself, even in small ways, you are reminding your own soul that you are worthy of respect, love, and truth. When I look back now, I realize something powerful. The situation didn't define me. The way I responded did. Yes, there were moments I cried until I couldn't breathe. Yes, there were nights when I wished I could rewind time and erase everything. But eventually, those wounds turned into my armor. And here's the thing about armor. It's not meant to make you hard and cold. It's meant to protect your heart so that you can still love, trust, and dream again. If there's one message I want you to take from this, it's this. Don't let someone else's betrayal become the reason you stop believing in yourself. Your life is still yours. Your story is still unfolding. And sometimes, the chapters that hurt the most become the ones that inspire others the deepest. So to anyone feeling broken right now, take it one step at a time. You don't have to have the whole plan. You don't have to pretend you're okay if you're not. Just keep choosing yourself, over and over, until the pain starts to loosen its grip. And when it does, and it will, use that strength to help someone else. Because you never know, your story might be the very thing that gives them the courage to tell theirs. You are not alone. You never were.